So good morning and welcome to another session of the Fall Professional Week Speaker Series. I'm Mike Mills, Vice President of Elite, and I'm excited to have you join us today to talk about a topic that is impacting all of us. This is the second session in the Fall Professional Week Speaker Series. We kicked off this morning with Jeff Zalingo talking about the changing nature of higher education, and we have several sessions following this one later this week. Two on racism, dealing with systemic racism, focusing on viewpoint of students, and then another panel focusing on the viewpoints of faculty, the chair and a dean. And then we also have a session on structured remote teaching and a panel discussion on that. And then we also will be bringing back Dr. Katie Linder to talk about self-care during this pandemic and how that impacts the learning process. So we're excited to have you join us. This session is being recorded. We appreciate your questions being asked in the chat, and we'll gather them and ask them at the end. So at this point, let me turn it over to my colleague, Shinta Hernandez. Shinta.
Thank you, Dr. Mills. Well, good morning, MC. Wow, it's so wonderful to see this many of you on Zoom, so we appreciate your taking time out of your busy schedules to learn and grow with us. So my name is Shinta Hernandez, and I'm the Department Chair of Sociology, Anthropology, and Criminal Justice at the Rockville and Tacoma Park Silver Spring campuses. As Dr. Mills pointed out, we have such a powerful week for you, all these wonderful presentations planned with that lineup of national external speakers, national MC speakers, and as he pointed out, MC students. So we're very excited to engage in this with you. I am proud to introduce our second presenter of Fall Professional Week 2020. Meet our very own Miss Stephanie Will. Her presentation is entitled Student Mental Health in the Remote Learning Environment. Ms. Will is the Mental Health Services Program Manager at Montgomery College and is a licensed clinical professional counselor. She works as part of the Student Health and Wellness Center for Success, which we know fondly as the Shaw Center. And she provides programming and training on a variety of mental health and substance abuse issues. Here at Montgomery College, Ms. Will has implemented numerous mindfulness workshops, stress relief programming, and the mental health first aid certification for faculty, for staff, and for students. And these are just naming a few, by the way. So before we get started, as Dr. Mills pointed out, please put your questions in the chat. We will allocate the last 15 minutes or so to a Q&A, and we will try to address as many questions as possible. So without further ado, please welcome Ms. Stephanie Will.
Thank you so much, Shinta. I am so excited to be here. I was telling Shinta and Mike earlier, I'm a little nervous. I don't think I've ever done a Zoom presentation with this many people. So I'm very, very excited that so many people are excited to learn about mental health. So yes, I'm the Mental Health Services Program Manager here at the college. The Mental Health Services Program is me. So it'd be great if I had a whole department, but it is me working in the Shaw Center. If you've not heard of the Shaw Center, you've probably heard of the mobile markets, and that's one of the bigger events that comes out of our office. So I do lots of mental health stuff in addition to that, Mindful Mondays. And we're actually also offering support groups led by other LCPCs for students this fall. So that's really exciting. Prior to coming to the college, I worked at a juvenile detention facility for 5.5 years. I worked in the substance abuse field. So I came from a very different environment before coming to MC, but have been able to use so many of my skills here. So hopefully, this is a relatively short presentation. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to cover everything in the mental health world, but hopefully this is a good start for everybody, and y'all can get something that's going to help your students and hopefully also help yourself during the course of the talk today. So I'm going to turn my video off, and then I'll go ahead and get started on the PowerPoint. All right. So some of the objectives that we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about what a mental health disorder actually is, make sure we're all on the same page. Then we're going to review the 4 R's. This is kind of how I like to structure how to communicate with a student who may be dealing with a mental health problem. So we're going to talk about how to recognize, how to respond, how to refer, and then how to report. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of the resources that are available at MC and in the community. And then we're also going to discuss the importance of self-care for faculty and staff, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, how can we be expected to take care of everything else that's going on in our life? Just as a kind of trigger warning, I'm not going to be talking about suicide extensively, but I will be bringing it up once or twice. So if that is challenging for you, make sure that you're doing something to take care of yourself, whether it means you have to sign off for a moment and collect yourself, or do some breathing exercises. I was doing some breathing exercises before we got started. I don't know if anyone saw me. My eyes were closed and I was trying to zen out a little bit. So do what you need to do, because suicide will be mentioned during the course of the presentation. So getting started, like I said, the first thing I like to do is talk about what a mental health disorder actually is, because there is so much misinformation out there about mental illness. And also we want to all be working off the same definition. Sorry, word escaped me for a second. So the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, is probably one of my favorite resources for individuals who want to know more about mental illness. And again, it's a great thing to give to students. Their definition is: a mental illness is a condition that impacts a person's thinking, feeling, or mood, and may affect his or her ability to relate to others and function on a daily basis. Each person will have a different experience, even people with the same diagnosis. So that means that basically when we're diagnosing a mental health disorder, we kind of have a laundry list of different symptoms, and you only need to have like 4 or 5 of them depending on the disorder. So person A might have these 4 or 5 symptoms, and person B might have a very different set of 4 or 5 symptoms, but they have the same diagnosis. So when we talk about somebody who has bipolar disorder, or somebody who has depression or anxiety, we talk about it as a diagnosis, but it could mean very different things depending on that person. So that's something to just keep in mind. And I'm pretty sure the first day of my psychopathology class in grad school, we opened up our diagnostic and statistical manual, and we all immediately diagnosed ourselves with just about everything that was in there. Because, these basically the requirements for many of these disorders are things that people go through at any given point during their lives. So one of the key things to remember when we're talking about a mental illness or a mental health disorder is a decreased ability to function. So when a person is not able to do their responsibilities, finish their schoolwork, take care of their family, get to work in the morning, or be productive at work, that's when we're looking at, okay, this has gone beyond to potentially a mental health disorder. The other important thing to remember about mental health disorders is that they are treatable. Because, I think it's 90% of mental health disorders 90% of people with mental health disorders will achieve some form of recovery. So when we talk about mental health disorder, we're not talking about some life sentence that somebody will never be able to recover from. I apologize. You might hear some pauses as I sip some water. I'm a very hydrated person. I also like to talk about what isn't a mental health disorder, because we have to be really careful about not over-pathologizing. When we talk about the recognizing part and we talk about the different signs and symptoms, it's really easy to all of a sudden be like, oh my gosh, this person is sleeping all the time. They have a mental health disorder. I like to use the terms of when I bought my first car. I bought a Kia Forte. I don't think I even knew what a Kia Forte was before I bought it. But then all of a sudden I drive it off the lot, and everywhere I see Kia Fortes. And I would like to think that I'm cool enough that people just ran out and bought some Kia Fortes because I bought one, but I know that's not the case. But when we're more aware of something, we're more likely to see it. So thinking about what isn't a mental health disorder is equally as important as knowing what a mental health disorder is. Because again, we all experience a range of emotions at some point in our life. Students are supposed to get anxious about exams. If they don't get anxious, they're probably not studying, right? It's normal to be kind of depressed after a breakup of a relationship, unless you were dating like the worst person in the world and you're like, running through the streets screaming, I'm free, I'm free. Most of us do end up feeling pretty down. So we don't want to take something like that, or again, somebody who's just lost a loved one and is in the bereavement process. We don't diagnose bereavement as depression because that's something that we would expect a typical individual to experience. We also have to think about developmental appropriateness. For those of you who are parenting, homeschooling while working and everything like that, you probably know you can't expect your, kindergarten or first grader to sit at a tablet for 4 hours doing schoolwork. They don't have that attention span. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have ADHD because they can't sit still during that period of time. So we have to be cognizant of what we can reasonably expect from an individual. Okay. So speaking of, everything that's going on, having to parent and homeschool and work, and if anybody else is, in school themselves, there's a lot going on right now. And COVID-19 has really complicated the mental health picture. What I've seen in discussing with other therapists, talking with some of our student workers here at the college, what we're seeing a lot is an increased amount of fear, anxiety, depression, and even anger. Anger especially was something that I saw a lot in the spring semester, just because there was so much uncertainty, things were changing so quickly, and, through no fault of our own as faculty and staff, if something changes, we have to kind of roll with it. But we also have to give that students might be angry and upset about all these changes that are going on, because it might be really difficult for them to pivot. If a person's dealing with anxiety, if you're type A like me, and I try to be like 3 steps ahead of the game, like at all times, and back at step 1, all of a sudden they change the rules, I'm going to be pretty upset about something like that that's going on. So we have to make sure that we're being kind to ourselves and understanding that, there's only so much we can do during this time, but also being kind to the students and letting them have the emotional reaction that they have, because they are entitled to it. And we are entitled to our emotional reaction as well. If we want to be angry about some stuff that's going on, we are entitled to that, as well. This is a confusing and a traumatic time for everybody. Some of the other things that we've seen is sleep disturbance. Back toward the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was talking about the intense dreams that they were having. What I'm noticing now is some of the intensity of the dreams is backing off, but that anxiety is still there. It doesn't necessarily, mean just because we're not having intense dreams that we're sleeping better. Oftentimes what we're seeing is people who are laying down to go to sleep at night and the anxiety won't turn off in their brain. This was me last night because I was nervous about this. Sometimes I really wonder how I ended up in this profession where I, give presentations for a living, and I'm terrified of public speaking. But, I'm laying there going through my presentation, and I'm sure, many, many people are, laying there at night and going through the list of things I have to do tomorrow, or maybe concerns that they have about COVID or traveling or anything else that's going on. The other thing is, when we're staring at screens all the time, that's increased blue light. Blue light messes with our melatonin. So the more we're watching TV or on like our phones or computers before bedtime, the more that can disturb our sleep. Another thing that we're seeing is decreased motivation. So if you're like me at the beginning of the pandemic, you were like, this is the opportunity to get stuff done. I cannot tell you how many craft projects I did. I redid my entire backyard. I mixed and poured 38 concrete pavers all by myself. I was motivated, but at a certain point that just kind of all stopped. And you kind of fall into either old patterns or things end up getting worse, and that motivation is harder. And it's not being lazy. We all have our quote unquote like lazy moments, but if you're ever sitting on the couch and you're thinking, wow, well, the dishes in the sink are, they're really crusting the top there, I should do something about that, but you feel like you can't physically make yourself move, then it might not be laziness. It might be an actual issue with motivation, which can be sometimes a sign of depression. Zoom fatigue is another big thing. I don't know if y'all are like me. We were doing meetings pretty much every day. And I love the people I work with. The Shaw Center team is amazing. But we got to a point where I don't think we wanted to see each other's faces for like at least a week. So being on Zoom all the time, the reason I turn my camera off is because when we can see ourselves, we're very conscious of, you know, what am I doing, more so than we are necessarily in person. So that creates, again, another strain on our body. The isolation has been really, really tough. And I know to some extent we're relaxing that a little bit as a society right now, but not everybody is able to. Personally, I'm an introvert. I've been preparing for this my whole life. I just get to be by myself and recharge and not have to answer to anybody or do anything. But after a while, even for introverts, that becomes really challenging. And at the beginning of the pandemic, when I don't know if anyone was like me, all of a sudden, all of your friends and your family, they want to do, you know, Google Hangouts and house party and game nights and movie nights. And so you almost had more contact with the people you care about. But then as things progress and as this kind of has become the new normal, that's kind of dropped off again. And that isolation is increasing again. And then we also have an additional increased consumption, of social media, you know, which if you're looking at, you know, your best friend who is super motivated and doing all these things, but you're feeling really unmotivated, you're feeling really down, you know, those comparisons can be dangerous. They can be, you know, they can be very hurtful and harmful. So, you know, while social media is a great tool to keep in contact, we also need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. I deleted Facebook from my phone. I just couldn't be on, you know, Facebook for anymore. But Instagram, I'm pretty sure I have seen every single Vampire Diaries meme that exists on Instagram. So I know that my consumption has definitely increased as well. But speaking of social media, if you need a laugh, El Arroyo restaurant in Austin, Texas has great signs. So, you know, for anybody, you know, on your computer thinking, wow, this show is really boring. And your boss is like, again, this is a Zoom meeting. You know, there is some really great stuff out there on social media that can make you laugh and can be really helpful during a time like this as well. Other major factors, as if this wasn't enough, we've got so much other stuff going on in the world and in our country right now. With the death of George Floyd, the country finally deciding, you know, we're not going to take this anymore. We are going to stand up. We are going to fight for justice. And all of this has also brought about a lot of racial trauma. The fact that these killings have been on video and available for people to watch over and over and over again, as a person of color, as a Black individual, seeing your people be murdered by police officers creates a trauma response. Even though you weren't there, it creates a trauma response. So that's going on as well for many individuals. And then, of course, we have the election coming up in November. So as the semester progresses, expect to see increased anxiety going on with that. And now with the post office and defunding the post office, and there just always seems to be something going on this year. So there's a lot going on besides COVID-19. So again, thank you, El Arroyo. Can't believe Tiger King was the most normal part of 2020. Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. But again, if you saw some of the headlines, oh gosh, was this in like March? The murder hornets. It feels like we skipped the murder hornets. All of a sudden that was like a big thing, and then that went away very quickly. I think I saw a headline the other day about an asteroid. I'm like, all right, it's just another thing in 2020, isn't it? I've kind of given up looking at those things at this point in time because I need to protect my mental health, and all of this anxiety and all of this worry is not good for us, just as human beings, regardless of your status as a faculty, staff, student, you know, community member, anybody. Okay, so that's a little bit about the context of what's going on in the world right now. Now we're going to talk about how do we recognize a mental health disorder? How do we respond to a student? Where can we refer them? And how do we report within the college? So the first things I'm going to talk about in the first 2 slides about recognizing, these are just general signs and symptoms of mental health disorders. I was thinking about pulling them because we're probably not going to see as much of these, in the classroom since we're not in a physical classroom. But the truth of the matter is, I think they're helpful to see in, our children, our partners, our friends. So I kept them in here. But, we're looking at things like changing in eating and sleeping patterns, having low or no energy, feeling numb or like nothing matters. A big one is the unexplained aches and pains. Again, in conversations that I've had, I ask people, are you feeling anxious about COVID or the election or things that are going on? And, people are like, no, like in my day-to-day, I'm not really feeling anxious. And I'm like, okay, cool. But as we're talking, they're talking about having stomach aches, digestive troubles. They're talking about having headaches. My friend just had to go and get checked out because she was having heart palpitations. So even though our mind may not be explicitly anxious, our bodies are. And our brain is really protecting itself by somaticizing all of the mental anguish that we can't control and kind of turning it into these physiological symptoms. So, it's very possible for individuals who have been experiencing. I also have just been extra clumsy and keep, tripping and hurting myself during this pandemic. I'm not sure what that's all about. So I'm in a second ankle brace this year. So yeah, unexplained aches and pains is a big one to look out for. Feeling helpless or hopeless. Now, when we talk about suicide, one of the number 1 red flags is hopelessness. So if a student is talking about they don't see how things are ever going to get better, things are never going to change, well, it doesn't matter if I do well on this assignment because I'm not going to be around. These are 100% we need to deal with this red flags that we need to be thinking about. Smoking, drinking, using drugs, confused, forgetful, angry, that interference with relationships, mood swings, having persistent thoughts and memories they can't get out of their head. Again, that goes along with this racial trauma. People who might be laying their head down at night might be seeing these videos over and over again, hearing voices or believing things that aren't true. Again, anytime somebody talks about hurting themselves or hurting somebody else, we 100% need to take this seriously. And again, this inability to perform those daily tasks. So again, going back to what I was saying earlier about what is a mental health disorder, what is not a mental health disorder, the way that we really recognize these as, okay, something might be going on, is to respond, which we will talk about in just a moment, but we want to look for patterns and clusters of behavior. We're dealing with students. Students are probably going to be tired, they're up, they're doing papers, they probably have a job and, families that they're, worrying about or helping out during this time. So seeing a student who's a little overly tired is probably not something that is going to be out of the ordinary. At least I know when I was in college, I was pretty much falling asleep during every class because I was just so exhausted. So that's why we always want to look for more than one of these things happening at the same time. We also want to look at significant changes from typical behavior. So maybe it's a student that you've known from previous semesters, or a student that even in the beginning of the semester has one type of behavior, and then by the end of the semester, that looks very different. Those are some of our clues. And again, that interference with the ability to carry out daily activities, if they're not turning in their work, if they're not able to get to any live class sessions, things along those lines. So some of the things that can affect mental health disorders, whether a person already has one or maybe developing one: stress. We add stress onto whatever's going on in our life, and it can make a mental health disorder worse. Thinking about school, family, money, medical issues, all of these different things. Think about how stressed we get about money. I was just talking to my team and they're talking about their side hustles and, you know, got to make sure that they're, you know, supporting themselves and making their money and everything like that. You know, I have friends that are in their PhD programs right now. It's a lot added on top of what is already a very stressful time. Trauma also can have a very negative impact on mental health disorders. So whether somebody has already been traumatized, maybe in their past, and then the added stress of the pandemic, the election, racial trauma, on top of that can make things worse. Or if, say, a person is already dealing with depression and then, you know, you go out to a grocery store and become the victim of a crime while you're there, you get mugged or something, that can negatively impact that depression as well. Not everything necessarily just impacts mental health disorders negatively, so good news there. Healthy practices are really wonderful. We want to do these things. This is how we get good sleep, eating well. And eating well doesn't mean cutting out carbs or being keto or anything like that. It means getting all of our nutrients, making sure we have what we need to fuel our body to do what it needs to do throughout the course of the day. Physical fitness, again, does not have to be, I'm going to the gym for 3 hours every day. I hate the gym. I would never do that. Like, that sounds like the worst thing ever. But, you know, just getting out and going for a walk around your neighborhood or around the block. And hobbies. Hobbies are so important. The more bored we are, the more isolated we are, the easier it is to get into that depression, and it becomes kind of a cycle. Again, that motivation decreases. It's harder to pick some things back up again, and then that further increases the isolation and depressed feelings. So the more we can get structure, the more we can get positive, fun things in our life. It doesn't matter what it is, whatever hobby you like. I currently trying to teach myself how to paint. It's not going super well, but it's something new and it's fun and I like it. Medications can also impact mental health positively or negatively. You know, if someone's not taking their medications regularly, it's not going to have the desired impact. Medications also can sometimes have pretty intense side effects. So that can really make a person feel negatively about taking the medication, or they might be taking it and just not be in a good space with the medication. Therapy and emotional support are also huge impacts on a mental health disorder. Just having family, friends, coworkers, like, think about it. When you've gone through something in your life, pretty much we mostly want to just talk to our friends or our family. You know, sometimes I'm calling my mom, sometimes I'm calling my best friend. You know, if you have a therapist, great, utilize them. Or if you're really close to your coworkers. But it's that emotional support system that is going to be one of the most powerful things that we can do for ourselves. All right. Whoop. So in a remote setting, I want to kind of preface this with, it can often feel like mental health symptoms are not mental health symptoms, but they're behavioral issues. It can feel like sometimes like it's laziness. It can look like this person's not prepared or this person doesn't care. But very often what it is again, that difficulty getting motivated. It can be that anxiety that a person is struggling with that is actually causing some of these behaviors. So again, if assignments are late or not turned in at all, maybe the student is saying like, hey, I will do any sort of makeup assignment. You know, I just need to get my grade to where it needs to be. I'm so sorry, I've been struggling. And then they're missing the makeup assignments. That can be, again, that indicator of that not being motivated due to potentially depression. Disengaging from discussion or inappropriate discussion. A marked difference between test scores and other assignments. They're turning in beautiful homework and papers, and then the tests, they are failing. Again, looking at potentially, you know, this might be a test anxiety issue. Maybe they're really struggling when they're going to take a test. I'm going to talk about my GRE. I have never had test anxiety in my life except for that exam, and it did not go well. Students who are missing classes, students who also have multiple illnesses, remember those aches and pains. Concerning content in papers, whether it's, a student talking about trauma, talking about suicide, even if it's a past history of those certain types of things. It's definitely something for us to kind of, again, red flag. I want to keep this in mind. Excessive emails. I'm sure everyone has had that student where you're like, I just cannot get another email from the student asking questions. But again, think about it. How much anxiety maybe is underlying all of these emails that they feel the need to continually reach out like that. And also potentially a disheveled appearance on Zoom. Again, I think I was talking to Shinta and Mike before we started about how, I don't always look my best on Zoom, hair in a ponytail, I'm wearing a t-shirt, no makeup, for the most part. But, as this has gone on longer and longer, and this is starting to feel more like normal, that might feel less acceptable. I shut my cat out today because I'm like, okay, maybe it's not super as acceptable to have my cat running around. But, students, again, not taking it as its own thing. A student might have overslept and just rolled right out of bed and came to, Zoom class. Or again, it could be a sign of something bigger going on. All right, so responding. Ooh, okay. The key point of responding is we want to actually respond. We want to address the student and we want to address the problem. I'm not telling or asking anybody to be a therapist. That is not your job. Frankly, I don't do clinical work on campus, so that's not even technically my job on campus. But hopefully, as a concerned human being, as a professor who wants your students to do well, a staff member who wants to see, your student workers succeed in their areas, we need to address these things and not just let them fester. Because the sooner we can get them to the right resources, to the right people on campus that can help, to the right community agencies that can help, the better that student has a chance of being successful academically, socially, and all around. So again, personally, I like the Zoom because it's more connection. You have less ability to, mistake what, tone and email and everything like that. So if you're doing virtual office hours, make sure that when you're talking with a student, you appear confident. Talking about mental health, and you don't even need to talk about mental health in general, but having difficult conversations can be hard. So appearing confident and helps a student feel like, okay, I can trust this person. I can ask them for help. We also want to listen non-judgmentally. That means that we are not putting our values or our judgments on what the student is going through, which is really easy to do. We're also not making it about us and being like, oh, well, I'll tell you about the time that this happened to me. If you've ever had a struggle before, probably the best thing anybody did for you was just shut up and listen to what you had to say. So if that's all we're able to do for our students is shut up and listen for 5 to 10 minutes and then point them to a good referral source, we've done a great thing. We also want to say positive and strengths-based. While we want to address the fact that there's an issue, we don't want to come at it in a really negative way because that's just going to make a person feel worse. We might want to talk about, hey, at the beginning of the semester, you've been absolutely a shining star with your work. Your test scores were great. You were turning in all your assignments on time. But in the last week or two, I've noticed that that's changed a little bit. So we want to lead with the positive stuff. We also want to empathize. This is not sympathy. Sympathy is, I'm so sorry for what you're going through. When we empathize, we're showing the person that we understand what they're going through. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're saying, oh, what you're doing is good. They could be handling it in a very, destructive way that we don't want to necessarily approve of or disapprove of, because we're not being judgmental. But empathizing simply says, I hear what you're saying to me. So we use things like reflections, like, wow, it sounds like you're going through a really tough time right now. That's empathy. It's something we all do in our daily lives and probably don't even realize that we're doing it. So it's just thinking about it and doing it on purpose. We always want to remain calm and non-confrontational. Again, if a student's feeling angry or upset about something, it's really easy to take that personally, but just understanding like the context that I talked about earlier, what's going on and how it's stressful for you and how it's stressful for the student. We need to be kind to ourselves in that situation and understand, okay, it's easy for me to get riled up, but also be kind to the student and realize, yeah, it's easy for them to get riled up too, because this is a tough time. We want to keep our voices even and at an appropriate volume. One of the big things when a person's dealing with a mental health issue, it can feel very much like things are out of their control. Not feeling like they're being acted upon by outside sources, that kind of external locus of control. So when a student is struggling, and there's ways that we can help them, there's different referrals, it's always great if we can give them options. There isn't always going to be options to give, but if we can, let the student make even just a small choice for themselves. It's trying to make a referral to counseling and advising for them to talk about, their academic plan, if that's what's stressing them out. Okay, well, what counselor maybe do you want to go to? It's just a small choice that they can make, but can be very, very helpful, giving them that sense of control back. And again, depending on what the situation is, if you are dealing with a student who maybe is talking about hurting themselves or hurting somebody else, we always want to let the student know what we're doing before we do it, as long as it's safe to do so. Probably the worst thing would be if, we talk about it in an on-campus way, if you signaled somebody to call public safety and all of a sudden out of nowhere 6 officers show up and now the student is upset and escalating the situation rather than de-escalating the situation. So make sure you and the student are on the same page during that process as much as we possibly can. So physical safety should not be an issue in the virtual setting, but again, if there's any threatening behavior and everything like that, please do what you need to do to keep yourself safe. I'm not asking anyone to be a hero here. Some don'ts in responding. Don't ignore statements or emails if they concern you. We all have that gut instinct, right? Where you've read that email or you had that conversation with the student and just doesn't quite sit right with you. Maybe they didn't mention suicide, maybe they didn't mention trauma, but there's just something about it that makes you feel uneasy. You know when something's wrong, so use that as an opportunity to address it. And the student might be like, oh no, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean for things to come across that way. Or they could be like, oh my gosh, thank you, I've wanted to talk to somebody about it, but felt like I couldn't reach out, felt like I didn't have anybody to talk to about it. Again, you don't have to be their therapist, not asking you to do that. Just be a kind person who can get them to the appropriate referrals. We also don't want to use sarcasm. We don't want to try to talk them out of their feelings or delusions. So somebody who might be going through a psychotic episode, might be believing things that aren't real, is writing in an email saying, all my other professors have it out for me, they're trying to fail me. It's not our job to say, oh no, your other professors aren't trying to do that to you. Because somebody who holds a delusion, that is a very firmly entrenched belief, and you're not going to make any headway, any progress. You're just going to escalate the situation. So that's where we want to use our empathy. Okay, I hear what you're saying, and it sounds like you're having a really tough time with your professors this semester. We're not talking about them trying to fail the student. We're not trying to talk them out of anything. We're simply being empathic and reflecting back what they're saying so they see that we understand what they're saying. Again, threatening disciplinary or police action. A disciplinary something may end up happening. We don't know that. We still have code of conduct in place in virtual learning. But when we start throwing around threats, we're more likely to escalate a situation. So we don't want to do that. We also don't want to minimize a difficult situation. I think we are all very much in the same boat with this pandemic. We are all struggling, some to different degrees than others, but I don't think there is a time where students, faculty, and staff have been probably more on the same page about, their emotional health and well-being than right now. But when it comes to certain things, we might be having an easier time than some students are. Maybe for them, motivation's really challenging, but for you, you're on your, 6, backyard marathon since the pandemic started. So we don't want to tell them like, oh, it's so easy, just do X, Y, or Z. If I can do it, you can do it, because we're minimizing what that student is going through. We want to be encouraging, be like, hey, I know you can make it through this, but we don't want to make them feel bad about the position that they're in or invalidate their feelings. We also don't want to promise confidentiality. Even in a virtual setting, we're still bound by Title IX. We, are still human beings. And if a student is talking to us about suicide, we still want to get them that help in that situation. So saying, oh, I promise I'm not going to tell anybody, that's not going to fly in certain situations. So don't promise that confidentiality. You can feel free to steal my words. What I like to say is, listen, I'm not going to tell anybody who doesn't need to know, but if I have to talk to somebody to get you some help and make sure that you're safe, I'm going to do that. So feel free to steal that, write that down, because you're letting them know. Because again, it's nobody else's business what's going on, but if we need to keep that student safe, we need to keep that student safe. All right, referral. This is the part I'm sure everyone was like, yes, we need this. So again, like I mentioned earlier, that support system, refer them back to their friends, their family. Our students come from so many different cultural backgrounds with so many different beliefs about mental health. So saying, oh, go talk to a therapist might not fly with all of our students. But if they feel close and connected to a spiritual leader, in many cases, that's great. Let them go talk to their spiritual leader. If they have a really good friend, family support system, again, that's hard for some people because some individuals' families don't believe in mental health disorders, don't believe in certain treatment. So maybe the family wouldn't be the best at that point in time, but it's about, finding out some of those cues from the students to figure out who is the best support system people to refer them to is going to be. It might be their friends in probably most situations when we're dealing with college students. Encouraging professional help. Again, if they have a therapist and say, okay, well, I have a therapist, but I'm not meeting with them for 2 weeks, we can always encourage them, hey, maybe you want to call your therapist and try to make a sooner appointment. It seems like you're struggling right now. Their psychiatrist, if they are having trouble with their medications, never, ever make any recommendations about medication unless you are a licensed medical professional. I am not. I can talk to you about medication, like generally what they do, but I do not make recommendations to students like, oh, you should stop taking this or you should try that. No, that is not within our purview. If they're having trouble if they mention having trouble with their medication, tell them to make an appointment with their psychiatrist. Again, if they don't feel comfortable talking to a mental health professional, refer them to a primary care physician. There are some really great organizations out there like Holy Cross Health, Mary Center down in the Tacoma Park and DC area, that they offer kind of this integrated primary care, behavioral health, dentistry type of thing. So even though a student might just go there just to go talk to your primary care physician about stress, hopefully they can be then successfully referred to other services that they have. Hopefully I have not lost everybody in the presentation yet and everyone's not necessarily on their phones, scrolling through Instagram or playing Bejeweled. But if you have your phone, I would like you to take it out and put these numbers in it, these National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and the Montgomery County Crisis Line. So being that we're in a virtual setting, if we have a student who is struggling or is having a crisis, we can't just walk them to counseling and advising right now. So we are currently using the Montgomery County Crisis Line, which is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by licensed clinicians. They are really wonderful. They do have a mobile unit. They only have one mobile unit. I will be honest and say I don't know what their policies are now due to COVID, but I assume they're still out and about. Even if you don't have, you're not talking with the student at that very moment, but there was something and you're like, I don't really know how to address it, and you feel like you need some advice for how to address it appropriately, you can call the crisis line, let them know the situation, and they can help talk you through the situation. They're a really wonderful resource. So please put those two numbers. And again, a crisis doesn't necessarily mean suicide. A crisis can be anything that you deem a crisis to be. And then for those of us millennials and Gen Zers who don't like to talk to people on the phone, there is a crisis text line, and there are crisis chats like IamAlive.org. The crisis chat, or crisis text line, is 741-741. You just text start and somebody will be there and they will talk to you. It's great. As far as some campus stuff, again, the Shaw Center, we have a really great website that has a whole bunch of different community resources listed on it. Info Montgomery is a great place to start as well. We have the link to that on the Shaw Center website. Plus, we also have information about all of our events that we're doing. I think I mentioned we're doing support groups run by licensed clinical professional counselors this fall. Plus, we do things like Mindful Mondays. Even though we don't offer clinical services necessarily, but that is a really good place to look for some of those resources. And I also mentioned the Shaw site because a lot of times mental health issues can get worse. Remember, we talked about some of those stressful life events. If a student is worried about food or a student's worried about housing, that can be causing some of the mental health problems. So maybe a therapist isn't going to be the most helpful. Maybe finding some emergency funding is going to be the most helpful. Maybe finding the day of the next mobile market or free food distribution elsewhere in the county is going to be the most helpful. So the Shaw Center has all that kind of great stuff on there. Counseling and advising is doing virtual appointments. And again, in the case of a student's really struggling with financial aid and that is making their mental health worse, referring them to financial aid, referring them to tutoring, whatever the specific service that's going to be most helpful. All right. And again, if we're in a life-threatening crisis situation, we're still going to use 911. Try to get the student to tell you where they're located. You can call 911, give them the address, say this is a mental health issue that this person is dealing with. Can you send a crisis intervention trained officer over? And they specifically have training to deal with mental health issues. Wouldn't be my first option, of course, but if a student's talking about like, oh, I just took a whole bunch of opioids, or, I just took a whole bunch of sleeping pills and they need that medical attention in that immediate moment, we need to make sure we're getting that to them as best we can. When we're making a referral, we want to make sure that we're just not telling them, oh, go talk to somebody else. Like, I can't help you with this, go talk to financial aid, because that feels very dismissive. So we want to give thorough information. Who specifically is the person in financial aid that they should be contacting? Again, don't just say, go to the Shaw Center website, write down, or, send them the link to the Shaw Center website. Talking about what the organizations can help with. If you're referring somebody to one of the help organizations in the county, knowing, okay, they can help with emergency food, they can help with emergency prescriptions, and also supplying maybe some questions that the students can ask, with the help organizations, they serve certain zip codes. So making sure the student is in the appropriate zip code, asking if they can help with, because some help with emergency rent money. So making sure that they ask about all the different services that they can utilize. And express care and concern while making the referral. Make sure that the student understands that you're not just trying to brush them off, that this is something that this other organization or this other person within the college can be helpful with. All right. So once we make the referral, we do all this, we still have the bit structure going on here at the college. So even in virtual form, bit still exists. And if there is an incident, a mental health incident, we do need to make that bit report. So the bit website, yeah, I guess I'm used to having them on the work computers, the little icons, but you can go to the bit part of the Montgomery College website, and they have all the different referral forms. And actually, I believe it's bit, conduct, and Title IX, and academic integrity. All of the different referral forms are all in the same place. So making sure we're not just, emailing the dean of students and saying, hey, I had a student. We want to make sure that we're filling out this report and giving as much information as possible, so that way that the BIT team can help the student as much as possible. All right. I think I went through all 4 R's. Hopefully, again, like I said, there's so much more than I talked about. So if you have time, please do explore some of the resources that are out there in the community. Montgomery County has a lot compared to many counties, and unfortunately, it's still not enough. So yeah, take a peek through the Shaw Center website and see what we've got listed there, see what the events we have there are. But now I want to move on to self-care, because we need to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves through all of this. And one of the biggest parts of stress management that I think that people don't always necessarily think about is knowing how to stop the stress before it starts. So there's a lot of things that we can't control, especially now. We can't control whether or not we're going to be going back for in-person classes in the spring. We can't control, technology issues. Oh my goodness. The technology issues, we can't always control that. So when we have all this stuff that's outside of our control, when we have things that is in our control, make sure we're not overdoing it. Again, like I said, I like projects. I like craft projects. I have about 16 started projects going on in my house right now, and it's too much. So I kind of overdid it, and it feels very overwhelming. So making sure you don't pull a me and kind of maybe taking on one additional thing at a time, seeing how it works before we add anything else, because we know during the pandemic, things can kind of change at any point in time. Mindfulness practices. I love mindfulness. Like I said, I do Mindful Mondays. They start September 14th at noon. They're virtual. They really help us key in on our early signs of stress, so we know when we can intervene. Because if you think about it, when you get to like a 10 level stress, like I have some road rage issues that I will admit to. And if I'm sitting behind the wheel of the car and I'm screaming and slamming the steering wheel, I'm probably well past where a mindfulness exercise is going to be super effective. Maybe it's going to bring me down to an 8. If I'm lucky, a 7. But if I'm kind of mindful all the time, checking in with myself, I can know early, hey, I'm feeling some tension in my shoulders, and I know that's an early sign of stress for me. Or I'm starting to feel kind of prickly, and I know that's an early sign of stress. So how about when I'm in those early signs, I do some of those self-care things for myself and bring myself down from maybe like a 4 to a 2. So being able to tune into those stressors, knowing what stresses us out, as well as what stress feels like in our body, is really important. Another important thing is self-compassion. And since the pandemic, especially, I want everybody to be compassionate with their self. and to know that you're not alone in going through this. We need to be kind to ourselves, give ourselves some grace. I had a therapist that I was talking to. She said that, I think her like 6-year-old niece said that to her, like, treat yourself with grace. And I was like, wow, that is a profound 6-year-old. But really, that's what we need to do. We need to understand we're going to experience different emotions. We're going to be kind of all over the place sometimes. We're going to mess up. We're not going to be perfect. And that's okay. Struggling is part of the human experience. It's something that connects us all together. We don't want to deny or suppress the negative emotions we have. If we're being mindful and we're noticing I'm angry about something, we don't necessarily want to say, well, I shouldn't be angry. I don't want to be angry. It's okay to be angry. We are entitled to be angry about certain things. We want to do what we can to help manage ourselves so that we're not doing something that might hurt ourselves or hurt somebody else, like get super road ragey. But we don't want to necessarily deny that we are experiencing those things. We also don't want to get swept up by them. Because again, if you have dealt with anxiety in the past, you know how easy it is to start feeling angry or anxious about something, and all of a sudden you're kind of spiraling out of control, and all you're feeling is anxious, and the world is ending, and everything is awful. We don't want to get to that point either, because that's not good for our health. You know, that's putting a lot of strain on us. So understanding compassionately that we're going to experience negative stuff, we're going to screw up, we're going to fail at things. The technology is going to go out on us at some point. I was just waiting for something to happen. I still have a little while on the presentation to go, but I was just waiting for something to happen, and you know, my computer to blow up or something like that during this. But understanding that, you know what, it's okay, you know, and that other people will hopefully be compassionate with us. So we need to be compassionate with ourselves. I'm sure most of you wouldn't, you know, say to a friend or a family member like, oh, wow, like you screwed up big time because the technology went out. So why would we say things like that to ourselves? So just something to keep in mind. Some great stress management tools. People always ask me like, oh, like, what can I recommend to a student as a stress management tool? Or, you know, what can I tell this person to try to do? But when it comes to stress management, really, sky is the limit. As long as it's something that is not hurting you or hurting somebody else, like drinking wine is not not a positive stress management tool. It might be delicious, but you know, that's not generally what we're going for. We're trying to avoid the mind-altering substances in those cases. But really, again, like I mentioned, I hate running. Running is the worst. Generally, the gym is pretty much the worst. So I'm not going to probably use physical activity as a great stress management tool, because I'm going to hem and haw, and I'm going to be like, I don't want to do it. And like, ugh, it's hard. I'm sweaty. It's gross. So that's not really for me. Again, it's good for me. So I'm still going to push myself to do it every now and then, but I'm not going to rely on that as my primary stress management tool. Again, I love the mindfulness meditations. And when my brain was racing last night, I was doing some mindfulness exercises, focusing on my breathing, trying to slow my heart rate a little bit to help me fall asleep. And I can also tell you, stress management tools will not work 100% of the time, right? Nothing works 100% of the time. But the more we do it, the more we practice, the better we get at it, and the more likely it is to work. So it wasn't super effective last night because the stress was definitely pretty high last night. But it helped a little bit. It helped a little bit to kind of get me into a better headspace than I had been earlier. Again, for me, crafting is a big one. Again, so many craft projects that I have done since everything started. So that's a big thing for me, and why I also have 16 different craft projects lying all over my house, because it's something that I like, it's something that I enjoy, and that's something that's fun for me. I need to be better at reining it in a little bit sometimes. But think of what it is that makes you happy. Is it gardening that makes you happy? Is it going for a walk? Is it journaling? Is it writing poetry? I'm always careful on TV a little bit, because when we're feeling sad or angry, putting on like a good sitcom is a really good strategy, because your body physically can't be stressed and relaxed at the same time. And if watching an episode of Big Bang Theory helps to relax you, then that's great. But once we kind of get to that point where there's a dent in the couch in the shape of Stephanie, then we have to start worrying about, is this impacting my motivation? Is this impacting my mood? And we don't want to get into that cycle. So, and again, I love TV, so it's a balancing act for me sometimes. But figuring out what that is for you. And if self-help isn't working, if you've been trying this for weeks and weeks and weeks, and, I keep practicing it, I keep trying different things, new things, talk to your doctor. You don't even need to make an appointment with your therapist. Primary care physicians are actually really an entryway point into behavioral health anymore. If you want to go directly to a therapist, that's great. I'm certainly not going to say don't do that, but don't discount how helpful your primary care physician can be. They're doing a lot of work in medical schools to help primary care physicians be able to screen for mental health disorders more effectively. So talk to a doctor if self-help isn't enough. All right, so if you take nothing else away from this presentation, I want you guys to remember that you're not alone. We are all going through this right now, and we're all going through it to different degrees at different times. I'm hoping that in the next week or so, I'll get another really great burst of motivation and get a whole bunch of stuff done. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But I know that there are other people, probably just about everybody, who are going through this or have gone through this at some point in time. And it's important that our students know that too, that they aren't alone if they're feeling stressed, if they're feeling depressed. I don't know how much everyone keeps up with news or things like that, or how much they're paying attention to what's going on with the pandemic. So they might not know that these vivid dreams have been really common, or that paying too much attention to the news is actually detrimental to your mental health right now. So making sure that everyone understands that self-compassion piece of things. We're not alone. Also important to remember that help is out there. There are resources. There are therapist resources that take Medicaid. There are therapist resources that are free. Pro Bono Counseling Project, fantastic organization where therapists do sessions for free. That there are psychiatrists out there. We just need to make sure that we're pointing our students in the right direction, or pointing ourselves in the right direction. And also that recovery is possible, that just because you're feeling this way now does not mean that it is going to last forever. And I know that can be a really overwhelming feeling. I had somebody ask me the other day when I thought we were going to be going back to campus, and I was like, oh, well, probably not until January unless something, changes in a big way. This was a couple weeks ago. And she's like, oh, wow, like, have you thought about what that means? Like, what do you think about that? And I was like, I don't. I can't. I can't right now. I'm taking things 1 week at a time. And if that's what we need to do to make it through, that's fine. We need to do what we need to do to cope, to handle our mental health, and to be the best person we can possibly be during a really traumatic time. It doesn't mean that I don't have a schedule of like events planned out or things I need to do, but it also means that I'm not, looking forward into a future that I have no idea what it holds at this point in time, because none of us really know what it holds at this point in time. So making sure that students are aware that recovery is possible, and it might take a while, it might be challenging, but it's out there and it's something that they can achieve. So again, some resources, NAMI.org, if you're interested in some myths and facts about mental health. There's also a link up there for that. I want to plug some events that I have coming up. I'm doing a workshop series called What is Counseling? And it begins on September 21st, and we're doing a workshop called What is Individual Counseling? And it's basically going to be an opportunity for a therapist. They're going to come in, they're going to talk about what does a session look like, what is expected from the client, what's expected from the counselor, and just kind of all those different things, helping anybody who's interested in learning understand that counseling isn't just sitting and talking to somebody for 50 minutes and then magically feeling better, like going through some more of the nuances of what the counseling experience might be. We also on October 1st are doing what are psychiatry and assessment. So we will have a psychiatric nurse practitioner coming in, as well as an assessment coordinator from their practice to talk a little bit about what does an assessment look like, what is a realistic expectation of medication, and I'm working on putting together what is group counseling as well. So hopefully, if you're interested in just getting that information, because it's unbelievable how a lot of people just don't know what counseling really is. So that's why I really wanted to get some good information out there. And we're also doing a recovery in quarantine workshop on September 17th. We're bringing in somebody from Born Free Wellness, and she's going to talk about what substance abuse has looked like since the pandemic and how recovery has been challenging, but also still very possible. So if you're interested in learning more about the substance abuse aspect of things, or more about what counseling actually looks like, please keep your eye open for Inside MC and the events calendar, and the Shaw Center website will have all the information about how to register there. And that is the end of my presentation.
This is wonderful, Stephanie. Thank you so much. Before we get into the actual Q&A, in the remaining 10 minutes or so that we have, I just want to tell you, and this was also shared on the chat, I really deeply appreciate your sharing your vulnerability with us, your honesty, your transparency, that you too go through all these range of emotions, because I think it's important for all of us to remember that we're not perfect, and that is okay. I know sometimes we strive for perfection because we have so many people depending on us, such as our students, right? And then of course at home, we have our home lives as well. But so with that, I appreciate the self-care strategies that you also shared toward the end of your presentation. So thank you for that. So here we have tons of questions that came through the chat, and I appreciate all of the numerous people who helped assist me throughout the way, along the way rather, on the chat, so I appreciate that. But I am going to vocally ask some of those questions, because for those individuals who called in may not be able to see the screen, so I'll just repeat some of those things as well. One question that came up a couple of times is this. When we did emergency remote teaching back in late spring, many of the faculty and staff were able to see their students before we had to start socially distancing. But when we go into this virtual environment, for all of us, faculty and staff, we will not have met them face to face. How can we make sure that we engage them and help them appropriately? And you alluded to that in the beginning, but just if you can elaborate.
Yeah, so I mean, utilizing Zoom whenever possible, just if you're going to, again, I'm not a professor. I'm not going to profess anything pedagogy-wise, but I just like having that connection, being able to see somebody face-to-face. So whether, meeting with your students in small groups to get to know them a little bit, or again, having some virtual office hours, even if it's just like 5 minutes might be really helpful, just to kind of get a baseline on all of your students, and hopefully also help them to know that you're taking the class seriously, so they should be taking the class seriously as well. And just, we don't need to necessarily be asking a litany of mental health related questions. A lot of this stuff just comes up from being a kind person when you're talking to somebody, like, hey, how's it going? Is there anything that I can help you with? Or maybe is there a direction I can point you in to somebody who can help you with something? Hopefully that is helpful.
Absolutely. And if I can also just add to that as well, I think this is a wonderful opportunity. I see the pandemic as an opportunity, more than the doom and gloom that many of us probably see on the news and social media. But we should look at this as an opportunity for us all across the college to engage in very collaborative, very comprehensive and holistic approaches to helping our students in whatever ways that they need us to help them with. So, I mean, someone mentioned on the chat, it could be something as simple, and I put that in air quotes, something as simple as an icebreaker or some alternative assessment in the online environment, office hours. There's the special class lists that are coming out this fall that will be made available for those who take the training this month. I mean, those are very good and very powerful, but yet very small scale in the sense that it's manageable to do. And that can help you engage with your students in ways that we probably weren't thinking about pre-pandemic. Okay, another question for you. So can you tell us the difference between anxiety and fear, and then mental health disorders and learning disabilities?
Okay, so anxiety and fear, oh God, that is a very technical question. Basically, so when we see anxiety, when we talk about like signs and symptoms, we're talking about, especially like a panic attack, we're talking about things like sweaty palms, heart racing, getting flushed, that fight or flight response kind of kicking in a lot of ways. And we do see a lot of that overlap with fear. But I think when we're talking about like an actual like phobia of something, well, I was going to say a phobia is an anxiety disorder. So, you know, we talk about a lot of avoidance of particular stimuli and everything like that. That is a great question. I don't know that I've ever had to answer that before. What is the actual difference? Honestly, I think in the grand scheme of things, it probably doesn't really matter what the difference is much. You're going to have, I don't want anyone to worry about diagnosing anything, but hopefully that's not what people were focusing on, because honestly, that's not our job in that role. We just need to know that the student is clearly stressed out. And is it an up stressed out, which might be like your anxiety, or is it down stressed out, like a depression? And I'm sorry, the other part of that.
The difference between a mental health disorder and a learning disability.
Okay. Well, a learning disability, I'm trying to think of the DSM. It's terrible. I haven't had to diagnose somebody in a while, so I don't know off the top of my head, because learning disabilities used to be included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, but they're not really a mental health disorder. I don't want to be giving incorrect information about brain structure and how all that works and everything like that, but learning disabilities can contribute to mental health disorders. Like untreated learning disabilities can lead to a lot of anxiety, stress, frustration, depression. One of the things that when we talk about ADHD, you know, we talk about seeing more the hyperactivity in boys, but in girls, we see a lot more of the depression because of how that impacts them emotionally. So I don't know if that's quite the answer that you were looking for, but mental health disorders aren't going to give you a learning disability. Okay.
I think that's right. Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you.
Like DSS counselors. We're doing dad.
Exactly. And this is what I mean by the collaborative approach, right?
Exactly. I don't know everything, I promise.
And again, I appreciate, many of us were saying, we appreciate the honesty that you shared with us on this Zoom. This was another question that was answered by a couple of people on the chat, and I appreciate it. But again, for those who cannot see the screen, and it's also worth repeating, can you tell us a little bit of how the bid process works, as far as once a faculty member submits it, then what? How involved or not as involved should the faculty be at that point? I know you alluded to it and mentioned it, but if you don't mind elaborating.
Yeah, so once the report is submitted and the team convenes, they look over the report. Is this a student that's known to them, or is this a new student? Depending on how detailed your report is, the team might come back to you and ask you for some additional information, some information about how the student is doing in their classroom. But generally speaking, they try to keep the process as confidential as possible. And after you make the report, unless things are, working a little bit differently, that's pretty much the end of the faculty's, responsibility at that point in time.
Okay. All right. Great. I appreciate that. I also want to comment that I liked in the beginning when you said everyone feels a range of emotions, right? And that is okay to feel. And you also told us don't over pathologize because otherwise we probably go down a rabbit hole we may not want to go down. And that might be too dangerous for us to go down. Yeah. So thank you for that word of wisdom. As we conclude the Q&A and before I go into some concluding remarks, what are some last words of wisdom? And this is not the last that we'll hear from you, of course, but I mean in terms of some nuggets of wisdom that you could share with us as we venture into this virtual semester, primarily virtual academic year.
Yeah, I think just understanding that what our students go through is the same things that we're going through, that our family members are going through, and could be us at any point in time. Maybe we're not struggling right now, but if we hit a year and we're still in this situation, we might hit like our own personal breaking point. So again, it's that compassion for ourselves and compassion for our students that I think is going to be so key. And I will also say, because I'm sure DSS would want me to, we have to be careful about what kind of accommodations and leeway we give to students, in being compassionate, because we want to make sure that, if a student really does have a learning disability or something that they need to talk to DSS, they need to be referred to DSS. But just understanding that, we're all going through it. We're all in this boat together. And even people who may seem like they're not impacted, they're impacted in some way, shape, or form. So just keeping that in mind, I think.
And thank you for that. Your presentation, and I'm assuming many of us on this call is thinking the same thing, it's given us a renewed sense of energy on how we can help our students, particularly because, as we all know, our students are coming to Montgomery College, coming to our classrooms, our advising spaces, our offices, with these unprecedented heightened levels of fear, insecurity, confusion, and you even said anger. Mm-hmm. Because of the numerous things that they're experiencing right now. And we were listing some of those things, right? You've got the racial drama, the upcoming election, hurricanes, postal service going down. I mean, asteroids. It's just, and this is just, a little bit half of 2020. We're not even at the end yet. So certainly thank you so much for all that you've given us today. I do want to, Stephanie, do you have any last words for us, aside from the words of wisdom, but anything outside of that?
Yeah, I just, again, telling everyone, go check out the Shaw website. Again, the stuff that I mentioned as far as events, that's just like the tip of the iceberg. Like, we're still going full force. We have a mobile market in Tacoma Park tomorrow. Again, open to faculty, staff, students, community members. We do not have dates for future mobile markets. We're still waiting for approvals. But yeah, we're trying to do hygiene drives, all that kind of good stuff. So definitely check out our website and be aware of all the good stuff that we're doing. Shaw Club.
Thank you so much for all the services that you provide for our students. And I hate to put you on the spotlight on this one, but you came to my department meeting a couple of years ago. You graciously offered your time and gave us a very nice background of what you basically gave today, but this was more comprehensive. If departments or disciplines or offices, units would like for you to come to their meetings, would you be able to do that?
Absolutely. That is part of my job. So if you're interested in having me come in, do a shorter version of this or all of this, I'm happy to do. Or if there's something slightly different that you're more interested in, but like along the mental health, substance abuse, yeah, no, that is 100% my job. It's Stephanie.will, no S at the end, at montgomerycollege.edu. So feel free to shoot me an email. On the Shaw website under the mental health page, my email is also there. Or if you email just the Shaw website, it'll get to me.
Stephanie. And this is a nice segue into the presenter that is coming on Thursday. If you have not signed up, please do so on MC Learns. Dr. Katie Linder is going to be talking more specifically on self-care in the online teaching and learning environment. So definitely stay tuned. I want to now hand this over to Dr. Mills to provide some concluding remarks.
Thanks, Shinta. Stephanie, wonderful job. As you can see in the chat, people were ecstatic with the information that you provided. We look forward to hearing more from you as this semester goes on. Certainly your expertise is going to be needed as we get through this semester and certainly into the spring semester. I do want to encourage individuals, if you have not yet registered for the student panel tomorrow, I would encourage you to do so. We're going to have a group of students talking about systemic racism and how higher education institutions can reach out to students and make them feel more inclusive on campus, more focused on social justice. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. That'll be followed by, as I mentioned, the faculty chair and dean panel talking about the same issues. So that'll take place tomorrow. Thanks for attending. The recording for this will be placed on the Elite website, and we'll send out information when that's available. Take care.